First one we're going to focus on is Dmitry Mitya Karamazov. Fyodor Karamazov. There's also an illegitimate son that we find out about. His name is Smerdyakov, or Smurdy. We'll call him Smurdy. How about that?
Looks like I'll have time to catch up on my Dostoyevsky.
Dostoyevsky was an interesting character. He considered himself Christian, but he also at the same time had his own doubts. He once said, "If someone pointed to me that Christ is outside the truth and that in reality the truth were outside of Christ, then I should prefer to remain with Christ than with reality." And this goes to show the main idea behind Dostoyevsky's The Brothers Karamazov, his notion of Christ-like love. And even if he were to find out that Christ did not himself live as fact, and he was never a factual, real person, that he would still believe in this notion of Christ, this idea of Christ, this idea of loving one another and helping one another and serving one another and forgiving one another. And that is a message that we can all use today in this world. So coming off the heels of Leo Tolstoy's War and Peace for the Book Club 2023, Benjamin McAvoy's book club, Fyodor Dostoyevsky's The Brothers Karamazov. And I'm just going to say, like, coming off that giant book of Leo Tolstoy, War and Peace, which was 1,000+ pages, and launching right into The Brothers Karamazov, which is 900+ pages. It was a bit daunting to me, but I stuck with it, and how could I not? I mean, there was just the promise of so many respected authors and critical thinkers of our contemporary time today have said that The Brothers Karamazov is one of the greatest novels ever written, so I had to. While Leo Tolstoy's writing is very poetic, very refined at times, Dostoyevsky's writing is a bit helter-skelter, you know. There's a lot of different genres in The Brothers Karamazov. You go from a dramatic tale of a family, right into a love story, right into a court drama at the very end. So it's a lot of different mixtures of genres, though. And while Tolstoy's characters in War and Peace were very realistic and truthful, Dostoyevsky's characters are also truthful and realistic, but in a more archetypal sense. There are many times in the novel where the characters are a bit over the top. So especially in the courtroom chapters towards the end of the book between Grushenka and the brother Dmitry Mitya at the very end, it can get a little bit melodramatic at times, and many of the characters are a bit over the top. But they are truthful and archetype. However, as much as I love Tolstoy's War and Peace and the characters, and The Brothers Karamazov had me contemplating more and more in the days after I finished reading the novel. So while Leo Tolstoy has my lit, loving mind, it is Dostoyevsky who has claimed my heart and my soul. There are many characters in The Brothers Karamazov, but we'll mainly focus on the three brothers and mostly focus on Ivan and Alyosha, the sons of Fyodor Karamazov from his second marriage. Dmitry Mitya Karamazov is the eldest son and the only child of Fyodor Karamazov's first marriage. Mitya is the sensual, passionate, reckless son. He straddles the line throughout the entire novel of sin and redemption. He has two main goals of the entire novel, and that is to get 3,000 rubles to his once betrothed Katerina in order to run off with his love, the lady of the night, Grushenka. On both goals, his father Fyodor stands in his way. He swears that he is afraid that he will kill his father to get his 3,000 rubles. He is the one that the authorities believe who killed his father and has stolen the money And while in prison and awaiting trial, he undergoes a conversion and resolves to make penance for his sins in America, where he will flee with Grushenka. Ivan Karamazov, the intellectual middle child. Ivan is the second son of Karamazov, first in his second marriage. Ivan is an atheist and comes home to be with his family amidst the turmoil, but he kind of shrugs off the conflict between his father and his brother. He engages with Alyosha on the topic of God and unjust suffering. Ivan is plagued by religious doubt and God's cruelty, and his arguments lead to his father's murder, and he falls into insanity. It seems at the end of the novel, he is about to die. Alyosha, the youngest Karamazov and the protagonist of the story, is the wisest. He's the peacemaker. He tries to bring peace to his father and his brothers, and he does help them when they ask him to. He is a complete opposite of his father. He is kind, loving, gentle, serene. His simple view of God and love makes the most impact on the characters of the novel. He studied at the monastery under the elder Father Zosima. You can probably consider Alyosha the main protagonist of the novel. He is the hero. He is the savior of the novel. So I'm going to start off with a summary, and just so you know that there are spoilers ahead. The book starts out with a background information on the scoundrel, the father himself, Fyodor Karamazov. He is the father of the novel. He's the father of the three main characters, the three main brothers, Karamazov. He's a shrewd businessman and a womanizer. His first marriage, the novel begins background information on his character and on his previous relationships. So his first marriage ends when his wife dies, and their son Dmitri, or Mitya as we'll call him from now on, is sent to be raised by friends and relatives. He marries a very young woman next, who bears his two other sons, Ivan and Alyosha, or Alexei, but we'll call him Alyosha for the rest of this video, who Fyodor also sends away. He couldn't be bothered whilst having his orgies. After time goes by, Mitya, the eldest, and also the soldier, comes back to claim the 3,000 rubles his mother had left him, and which his father never gave him even upon her death. The Karamazovs decide to go to the monastery so that Alyosha's elder Father Zosima can arbitrate and quell the conflict between father and son. Ivan and Alyosha are also in attendance. In a hilarious scene at the beginning of the novel, Fyodor Karamazov feigns faithfulness and accuses others of degeneracy, and in general makes a buffoon of himself. Tensions boil over, and Father Zosima bows to Mitya and kisses his feet and exits without a word. Everyone is dumbstruck, and the tensions are at an all-time high. Fyodor Karamazov bids Alyosha to leave the monastery. This is where we also learn of Smerdakov, or we'll call him Smerdy from now on, who may be the illegitimate child of Karamazov. He is very intelligent and aligns himself with Ivan as they are both atheistic. Mitya is beside himself and asks Alyosha for help in trying to get the 3,000 rubles from his father. We learn that Mitya needs this money as a debt to pay to his former fiancée Katerina, so he can cleanly, or as cleanly as he can, break from her to run off with the lady of the streets, Grushenka, his love. Alyosha goes to his father, and there is a heated discussion between the servants Smerdakov, or Smerdy, and Gregory about God and immortality. Smerdakov's ideas very much mirrors Ivan. Gregory thinks Smerdakov is of the devil. Karamazov asks his sons Ivan and Alyosha what they think. Ivan says he does not believe in God, and Alyosha says that he does. In a moment, Mitya bursts in and is stark raving mad, so angry, and begins to beat his father. This is because Mitya thinks that Grushenka has come to run away with him. Ivan and Alyosha break it up, and Alyosha tends to his father's wounds. The next day, Alyosha visits Katerina, Mitya's ex-fiancée, and sees Ivan there. Alyosha knows that Ivan and she are in love, but too proud to admit this to themselves, let alone to each other. Ivan and Alyosha have dinner later, and it is here when Ivan tells Alyosha his ideas of God and questions how something good and pure would allow human suffering. He goes into horrific situations of children's suffering in particular. He then tells Alyosha of a poem he's working on called The Grand Inquisitor, in which he speaks of Christ as a selfish being and relays his ideas of cynicism and power. Alyosha is shaken a bit by his brother's poem, and Ivan is a bit shaken too, but not of Alyosha and his goodness. When he returns to his father's house, he sees Smerdikov and feels a sense of disgust. He feels that Smerdikov believes that he and Ivan are equals. They are talking about Mitya's proclivity and Mitya's anger towards his father, Fyodor Karamazov. And Ivan doesn't want anything to do with it. He sort of wants to run away from it all. And Smrti is there, and he encourages Ivan to go away, but not too far away. Okay, as we move on. Alyosha returns to the monastery where his beloved Elder Zosima is dying. Elder Zosima relays some wisdom to Alyosha and commands him to leave the monastery and to go out into the world. After Elder Zosima dies, at the end of his funeral, Elder Zosima's body begins to stink, and the critics of Zosima claim that it is because Zosima was not so pure and innocent, but corrupt. This embarrasses and deeply affects Alyosha, who revered Elder Zosima. He becomes so angry and upset that he goes out to live in the world, to partake in sin. He straightway goes to Grushenka's home, led by Radikin, a member of the monastery as well, expecting to be seduced, and he's willing to go through with it. While there, Grushenka tells Alyosha of a story about a wicked woman who gave an onion to a beggar. The story we'll discuss later on. As Grushenka tries to seduce Alyosha, she notices that Alyosha is sad. She learns that his misery stems from the death of Zosima, and she takes empathy upon Alyosha. She stops and admits her plan that she paid her cousin Radikin, we find out later that they're cousins, to bring Alyosha to her in order to seduce him and reveal his hypocrisy, because she thought that Alyosha judged her from a terrible interaction that she had had with Mitya's former ex-fiancée, Katerina. But Alyosha sees the goodness in her, and instead of judging her, he thanks her, and his faith is renewed. Mitya tries to find a way to repay Katerina over a few days. No one will lend him any money, so he goes to Grushenka's home only to find out that she is not there. Enraged, Mitya goes to his father's house thinking that she'll be with him. At this point, the story jumps from a moment when he's in his father's garden, and the next he is in a shop with a wad of money and blood all over his clothes and hands. He catches wind of where Grushenka is with another lover and goes to her. She realizes that she indeed loves Mitya, and they plan to marry as the authorities burst in and take Mitya into custody for his father's murder. It is also around this time that Alyosha befriends some schoolboys. Realizing that they are mean to an Ilyusha, a boy who had stabbed another boy with a penknife because they were making fun of his father. Alyosha realizes that Mitya was the cause. Alyosha's wisdom and patience and love bring the boys together. Ilyusha is able to forgive the boys, and the one who was stabbed by the penknife also forgives Ilyusha. They all adore Alyosha and look to him for guidance, and as Ilyusha falls gravely ill, they all come together around his bedside to cheer him up and to take care of him. Meanwhile, Ivan speaks with Smerdikov about the murder, and Smrti admits to being the culprit, and Ivan is shocked and wants to implicate Smrti, but Smrti says that Ivan is also complicit because of the conversation they had as Ivan left, and that Ivan too wanted the death of his father, and that his mantra that all is lawful helped Smrti commit the crime. Ivan is racked with guilt and has a nervous breakdown. On the way home, Ivan helps a drunkard from freezing to death, and at night, he dreams that the devil, dressed nicely to go to a cocktail party, sits in his room with him and taunts him. The next day, Smrti is found hung, but Ivan wants to help his brother and admits that Smrti is the killer. He also, in his madness, implicates himself. Katerina, in desperation, jumps up and produces a letter that Mitya had written where he admits that he had wanted to kill his father and take his money. In doing so, she wanted to save Ivan, but Mitya is condemned. He goes to prison. Alyosha visits Katerina toward the end of the novel. She is nursing Ivan, and she is resolved to save Mitya because that is what Ivan wanted to do. They forgive one another. Mitya and Katerina forgive one another as well. She arranges for Mitya to escape to America with Grushenka. So back to Ilyusha and the schoolboys. Ilyusha dies, and Alyosha gathers the boys and tells them to remember the love they have for one another, and they had for Ilyusha, and to do good in the world. The novel ends with the boys cheering hurrah for Karamazov. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is the parable of the onion. So Alyosha, after he realizes that his father Zosima, he is laid to rest, and his body starts to stink almost immediately. I guess that is a sign back then that the person who is laid to rest was not pure, was not clean, was not righteous, and a lot of Father Zosima's detractors considered that a sign of Father Zosima's corruption, and he wasn't as innocent or pure or righteous as everyone had thought he was. And so this brings Alyosha a lot of pain, a lot of sadness. He loses his hero, someone who he almost worshipped, right? But realizing that Father Zosima is nothing but human kind of rattles Alyosha a little bit. And so he at this moment decides that he will go out into the world, because Father Zosima had told him right before he died that Alyosha should go out into the world and love people up close, or go out and experience the world. And that is what Alyosha intended to do. He goes out, but with a darker motive, right? He wanted to commit sin. And so this is why he goes to Grushenka's house. Grushenka is Misha's lover. She is also the lover of their father, Fyodor Karamazov, as well. So he goes to her place, and Radikin, who is another member of the monastery, leads him there. And he's ready to commit sin. He is ready to be seduced by this woman, and he just lost a bit of faith, and he just kind of gives up and wants to live in the world. While he is there, though, Grushenka sees Alyosha, and she sees that Alyosha is very, very sad and withdrawn, and she asks what has happened, why are you so sad? And he admits that Father Zosima had died, and she jumps off his lap because she was trying to seduce him, and she says, I can't do this is not right, and she crosses herself, and she admits what she was planning to do, that she had paid her cousin Radikin to bring Alyosha so that she can corrupt him, seduce him, and that he can unveil his hypocrisy toward her. But at that moment, she steps away from that plan because she has empathy for Alyosha at that moment. And she had explained a story. And in that story, she talks about a wicked woman who is in hell. God asks an angel of heaven to go to that wicked woman who is burning over a lake of fire and brimstone. And he says to the angel, offer her an onion, because that woman was wicked her whole life, but one time in her life, she had given a beggar an onion. And so God gives an angel an onion to save this wicked woman from the brimstone, the lake of brimstone and fire. And so the angel goes and he offers this onion to this wicked woman over the fire, and she grabs onto it. And she's getting pulled out by the angel, but while she's getting pulled out, there's other people, other wicked ones in hell, trying to grab onto her legs, holding for dear life because they too want to be saved. And at that moment, that wicked woman, as she's grabbing the onion, she's kicking the other people off of her and telling her, no, this is my onion, this is my salvation, and I'm the only one that's going to get it. And at that moment, the onion breaks off and she's lost forever in this lake of fire and brimstone. So Grushenka tells the story, and the novel at this point delves into sort of a tertiary level of narrative. It's a story within a story, but the story has a lot to do with the theme of the novel, and it's offering an onion. And the onion represents an act of kindness and an act of love that woman had for that poor beggar. But Grushenka, at this moment, as she's talking to Alyosha, she says, I am a wicked woman, I am no good, I am that woman that took the onion for herself, that she thinks of no one else. And maybe she had offered an onion once, but she'd always take it back because she always protected herself, and she was always very selfish. So after she confesses to Alyosha that she had tried to seduce him, but she is sorry for that, and that she feels empathy and love and compassion for him at the moment that he's grieving Father Zosima. At this moment, Alyosha becomes enlightened and free, and his faith comes back. as he sees this woman who is a wicked woman have a sliver of hope. He sees a sliver of hope in Grushenka, that she can do good. And this reignites his passion and his love for humanity and his faithfulness in God and in Jesus Christ. And as he leaves, Grushenka is, wondering why he is leaving and why he is not, totally dismantling her with his words and all of that. She is wondering why he is leaving. Why, Alyosha? Why are you leaving? And he says, she says, what have you done for me? And he says, I have given you a little onion. Alyosha begins to cry, and he realizes the power of compassion and empathy, even if it's a small moment of forgiveness and bonding that those two had at that moment, who are total opposites, right? Grushenka is a prostitute, and Alyosha, a monk in the monastery. The next theme we're going to talk about is love, but specifically from the point of view of Ivan's love, and the experiences that Ivan had. So the first time that Ivan and Alyosha are alone, they eat together. Their respective philosophies come out. And it is interesting to note at the beginning of the novel that Karamazov, the author, but I should say this novel has many, many layers to it. Think of like an onion. We have the author, who is Fyodor Dostoyevsky. Dostoyevsky wrote the novel. However, there is a narrator. The narrator sees all, and he sometimes delves into the narrative to talk about the brothers and how he was there during the trial and what he has heard because he had lived in that town with the Karamazovs. So it goes from level to level and then down to the story. And it is interesting to note at the beginning of the novel, it claims how Alyosha really, really loves Mitya, even though he did not grow up with him and he is only his half-brother. The novel claims how much Alyosha loves Mitya and not necessarily Ivan. So Alyosha, at the beginning of the novel, is sort of wary of Ivan. He sees Ivan as someone who is neither hot nor cold, but someone who is lukewarm, who doesn't want any trouble, who just kind of wants to do his own thing. And he feels a sense of coldness coming from his brother, Ivan. So this is the first time in the novel where they sit down and they have dinner and they start talking about their philosophies of God because of the earlier conversation they had at their father's house with Smerdikov and the Gregory, the other servant. So you would think that Alyosha would love Ivan more because you see Mitya and he's totally, he's violent and he's passionate and he gives into his passions with Grushenka, and he does wrong to Katerina, his ex-fiancée. But Alyosha sees, even with all his faults, that Mitya is a deeply loving person, and he doesn't get that sense from Ivan. Ivan is cold, intellectual. He sees things from afar. He observes things rather than experiences them. And so it's interesting when they come together at this dinner where their different philosophies come out. We can see the differences between Ivan's love and Mitya's love too. That if we mirror Mitya and Ivan too, as Alyosha kind of sees them and kind of observes both of them, Mitya is very passionate and in love, and he is willing to do anything to a fault to gain the love of Grushenka. But Ivan, who is supposedly in love with Katerina, he can hardly admit to her that he loves her at all. And so Alyosha sees this. He sees that there is a sort of coldness to Ivan. He's very aware of that and wary of that as well. So when Alyosha is with Katerina and Ivan towards the beginning of the novel, and Alyosha sees that Katerina and Ivan do in fact love each other, Katerina just cannot let go of her anger towards Mitya. And so she has no time right now for love. And Ivan, he kind of shrugs his shoulders and laughs it off, and he kind of goes off and he says, I'm free of all this. I'm free of you. I'm free of you. I'm free of all my family. I don't want anything to do with my father, my brother, and their problem. And he just sort of wants to just get away from it all. And Alyosha sees this. And Alyosha at the dinner expresses concern for Mitya and their father. And Ivan just sort of has an angry moment and bursts out. He says, oh, that endless refrain of yours. Am I my brother Dimitri's keeper? What Cain replied to God concerning his murdered brother, wasn't it? But the devil take it. I can't really go on staying here as your keeper after all. I've finished my tasks and I'm going. So Ivan here is minding his own business, but one has to really wonder, does that really lead to peace for him and for his family, right? And later on, as Ivan comes to find out that Smrti really was the one who killed their father. So Ivan feels extreme guilt for a conversation that he had had with Alyosha and Smerdyakov and Grigory at the beginning of the novel, right? He expresses that he'll do the right thing and confess and implicate Smrti. So once Ivan finds out that Smrti killed their father, he's on his way to talk to Smrti. And on the way there, there's a moment where he sees a drunkard, and it is freezing outside. It's beginning to snow, and he sees a drunkard on the side of the road. And he has this moment of, well, he's there, let him, he might die there. And so Ivan just continues on his way talking to Smrti. And once he has that conversation with Smrti, and he realizes that Smrti kind of utilized Ivan's philosophies and kind of warped his mind and led to the murder of his father. Ivan is really staunch about setting things right, going to the courthouse, admitting that he had this conversation with Smerdyakov, that Smerdyakov confessed to him that he was the one that killed their father. And on the way home, Ivan has a good feeling about himself. He feels good for a moment because he feels that he is going to do the right thing. And as he's walking home, he sees the same drunkard again, and he lifts him up onto his shoulders and his back, and he carries him to a nearby home or nearby police station where the police can take him somewhere warm. And that's just a sliver of hope for Ivan in that moment. He's done the right thing, and he really feels that is valuable. So at that moment that Ivan picks up this drunkard from off the road, and he carries him on his shoulders so that the police can take him to a safe and warm place so he doesn't freeze to death on the side of the road. In that moment, Ivan does become his brother's keeper. It's not his actual brother, but it is actually a stranger. And it's just interesting because Ivan does have a great character change, and the trajectory of his character changes from the beginning to the end of the novel, sort of. And we'll talk a little bit about sort of a little bit later. But going back to what Ivan had said, well, this kind of mirrors what Ivan was talking about towards the beginning of the novel, and he does a sort of a little bit of a 180 here. As Ivan and Alyosha and Smerdyakov and Grigory at that time at their father's house talking about God and love and Christianity, as Ivan says, I can never understand how one can love one's neighbors. It's just one's neighbors. To my mind, that one can't love. Though one might love people at a distance. And this is sort of an idealism that Ivan has. He says that he doesn't feel the need or necessity, or even he doesn't feel that it is a possibility to really love people from up close, especially strangers, right? But here at the end of the novel, and after confronting Smerdyakov, he's able to become his brother's keeper. He's able to love a stranger, not at a distance, but up close. He carries him on his shoulders and into another person's home so he could be saved. So at the trial on Ivan, after learning that Smerdyakov hangs himself, he's still committed to saving his brother Mitya, because even though at the beginning of the novel he says that he is not his brother's keeper, at the very end of the novel, Ivan is his brother's keeper, and he's willing to sacrifice himself because he feels that he is also sort of complicit in their father's murder. Smerdyakov had that conversation with Ivan before Ivan went off to Moscow, or he was headed to Moscow, but he was diverted by Smerdyakov to somewhere else. But Smerdyakov had relayed the information that he was worried that Mitya was going to kill their father, and that he told Ivan the whole situation of how their father was afraid of Mitya, and that Mitya would do harm to him if he ever had the chance. And Ivan sort of shrugs his shoulders and kind of feels like it's not his problem, and he leaves. And Ivan, in that moment, when he's talking with Smerdyakov, he realizes that he truly did feel the same as Mitya did, that he probably in part wished for his father's death because he did not stay behind to prevent Mitya or anybody else doing harm to him. So that is something that has happened. He goes to the courthouse, and he offers himself, even in his madness, he offers himself in place of his brother. He says, "Look, I say, take me instead of him. I did come here for some reason after all." even in this noble act, Ivan is sort of fighting. There's a division in Ivan that we sort of see throughout the novel. And I'll maybe make another video specifically on Ivan because he's such a fascinating character. But there's a division in him. He does not quite get to that moment of where Alyosha is in believing and having full faith. He's there. He's going back and forth. But there's glimpses of hope for Ivan, especially towards the end of the novel. There's the theme of Ivan's poem, right? And Ivan's poem is sort of an argument for atheism. The poem, The Grand Inquisitor, took me a few times to read. It was very dense and there was a lot of things going on in there. But to just sort of start, this happens when Alyosha and Ivan meet again and they're having dinner. And they start talking about God and Jesus Christ and the world and humanity. So Ivan is a humanist. He sees that there is needless suffering in the world. And he starts talking about the horrific things that are happening to the children around the world. And he points to those things and he says, how can a God let these things happen? And how can we pretend that these things are happening and still say that there's a benevolent and loving God? And it's really interesting because it seems like even Fyodor Dostoyevsky, the author of this novel, he had some doubts when it came to his Christian belief. And it sort of seems like he is, sort of talking it over within himself in this particular poem, Ivan's poem, The Grand Inquisitor. He's talking and working things out in his own mind. And in this conversation, we see his belief in God, his doubts of a benevolent God. Alyosha responds to him, there is no sin, and there can be no sin on all the earth, which the Lord will not forgive to the truly repentant. Men cannot commit a sin so great as to exhaust the infinite love of God. Can there be a sin which could exceed the love of God? So once Alyosha mentions Jesus Christ, and that Jesus Christ had suffered for all the sins of the world, and that he alone can only forgive and pardon all the sins, Ivan takes this opportunity. He smirks, and and Alyosha doesn't realize that he had opened the door for Ivan at this moment to talk about his poem, The Grand Inquisitor. And in the poem, the Grand Inquisitor is in the midst of the Spanish Inquisition, and Christ at this time returns to the earth. And this is happening in his poem. So once again, the narrative is diving into a tertiary level of narrative. But this is also when these story within a story also upholds this theme of Ivan's poem. This greatly upsets the Inquisitor, who captures Jesus Christ and condemns him to death. He speaks to Christ and tells him that Christ and his teachings will actually get in the way of the salvation and true salvation and peace. The Inquisitor claims himself as the true savior of the world and the one who has true love for humanity. Men can't live on bread alone. The Grand Inquisitor sort of taunts Jesus Christ, the captive in the cell, and he says, you preach that men can't live on bread alone, but there are actual men who are starving to death. That sort of love and spirituality is a bit elitist, and there are true horrors happening. There are true people out there who are dying of hunger, and they don't want anything other than bread. They actually just want bread. The church and the Inquisitor will take care of everyone. He taunts Christ about turning down the kingdom of the world when he was tempted of Satan, and that he could have fed everyone, that he could have saved everyone, that he could have gained all the kingdoms of the earth and brought about world peace. But he claims that Jesus Christ was just being a martyr at that time, and that the Grand Inquisitor and the church will bring world peace. In actuality, and Ivan realizes this as he is, relaying the poem to Alyosha. And this is why Ivan is so back and forth. You see it in his poem and how he responds to what he says in the poem, and even towards the end of the poem, we see that there's an imbalance in Ivan's mind. He cannot come to grips. The sort of imbalance of morals, of values is just in his mind all the time, and it shows up at the end of the novel, and it shows up at the end of this poem as well. The Inquisitor doesn't speak of love, and Ivan realizes this, but of power. And Ivan identifies with the Inquisitor. He knows that, Ivan knows that he is a part of the problem, that we all search for power, that we are all only looking for power. And he doesn't like this part of himself. But however, he deduces that the Inquisitor in actuality and in its simplicity is correct, that the Inquisitor and all people only really want power, and they don't really want true love or cannot love. Sort of in this conversation with Alyosha, he indicates that all things are lawful and that he will not disown that statement that he had once said at his father's house, that all things are lawful because there is no God, there is no devil. And then he says, Christ kisses him on the lips. He kisses the Inquisitor on the lips. And the Inquisitor is moved. And it just goes back to the love situation. So Ivan laughs off the ending, and he doesn't really see... So Ivan, even it's his own poem, he sort of laughs at himself, and he laughs at the poem, and he laughs at this idea that Christ says nothing to the Inquisitor, but just kisses him on his lips. And the Inquisitor he's puzzled. He's sort of taken aback and doesn't know what to think about that. He still wants to go forward with his plan, but he allows Jesus Christ to live. He opens the door to the cell and leaves it open so that Christ can escape and live. And that small act of love that Jesus Christ did for this Inquisitor, he looked past the Inquisitor, his need for power, this old man bent on, taking over the world and forcing world peace on everyone through the Spanish Inquisition, that Christ looks past that and sees the Inquisitor for who he truly is, someone who we all are, someone who wants to be loved, someone who needs to be loved. We realize this poem also gives a little bit of hope. There is a silver lining or a sliver of hope we see in Ivan. He's the one that wrote this poem. So this is his poem. So somewhere in Ivan, he is capable of this kind of love. But as we know that his ideals sort of keep him back from truly loving someone up close. He is able to be a humanist and say all of humanity needs to be saved and loved and fed and clothed. But to love someone up close was always a difficult thing for Ivan. And the mantra that Ivan says towards the end of that poem, that all things are lawful, is the exact philosophy that Smrti uses and aligns himself with. And Smrti is that character who kills the brothers' father, and possibly his father as well, because there is a strong indication that Smerdyakov is Karamazov's illegitimate son, but it's never stated. His ideas, Ivan's ideas, have a real effect, and we see this in Smerdyakov. He shudders. So Ivan shudders when he sees him because he fathoms that they are alike, and indeed they are. After Smrti explains to Ivan that Mitya is in a rage and his father fears for his life, Smrti convinces Ivan to leave, and Ivan does. Ivan later admits he had no desire to protect his father or Mitya. Smerdyakov relays that all things are lawful, and Ivan violated a higher law of merely wishing the death of his father. So even though Smerdyakov is the one who kills the father, Ivan is complicit because Ivan committed a greater sin, right? He wished the death of his father. He realizes that all things are lawful, and that sort of philosophy has led to this horrific, terrible thing, and that it is bad, it is wrong, and that there is a sort of evil out there. And this takes over towards the end of the book. And once Smerdyakov realizes that Ivan realizes his own faults and his own evil nature inside, Smerdyakov taunts Ivan and says that, Ivan, you're afraid now. All the things that you had once said that all things were lawful wasn't really true. He did sort of bring about his death. He wished for his father's death, or at the very least did not care whether his father lived or died. He was not there to protect him or to stop to stop Mitya. He was there to just leave and never come back to his father's place ever again. Smerdyakov realizes that Ivan realizes this. Smerdyakov taunts Ivan, and he tells Ivan, hey, you're the one that came up with this philosophy that all things are lawful, and now you're afraid, and now you're fearful. The next theme is Ivan and the devil. And when he talked to Smrti, when Ivan goes to talk to Smerdyakov, once he figures out that Smerdyakov was possibly his father's killer, Smerdyakov is on the brink of death. Smerdyakov is a epileptic, and he had an epileptic episode not too long before Ivan comes to see him. So Ivan goes to see him, and he realizes Smerdyakov is dying. He goes to his room, and the room is very, very hot, and they're sweating there and together. And so this sort of represents hell, and that Smerdyakov is in hell, and Ivan is going into hell too. And they talk about what Smerdyakov is up to, what he wishes to do. And Smerdyakov says that he's learning French right now. And it's just so very interesting that little portion is in the book, because Smerdyakov, while he's learning French, we later learn that when Ivan is sitting with the devil in his hallucination, the devil is also learning French. And so it can be kind of said that Smerdyakov is a reflection of the devil himself. But both are ill. So Smerdyakov, when he sees Ivan come in, he realizes Ivan, his eyes are sunken. He's just so gaunt and thin and pale and sweating. And he just has a brain fever of some sort. And Smerdyakov picks up on this, and he realizes that Ivan is also dying too. And Dostoyevsky sort of indicates that they are both dying, that they are both suffering from, that their souls are dying. Their bodies will eventually die as well. We don't really know whether or not Ivan, at the end of the novel, dies, but there's a strong indication that he will die at the end of the novel. So later that night, after meeting with Smerdyakov and telling Smerdyakov that he's going to the police to implicate him, and even tell of the conversation that they had at the gate, Ivan goes home. And remember, on the way home, he picks up the drunkard, throws him on his shoulders, and carries him so that the police can help him. And when he gets home and he lays down, he has a hallucination or a dream that the devil is there. And the devil is dressed nicely, as if he's going to a cocktail party, but his clothes are all in tatters. And Ivan, at that moment, he's just battling and having a conversation with the devil, saying, "You are not real. You cannot possibly be real. Tell me a joke," things like that. And Ivan, I think, knows that he's trying to battle against this notion of the devil being real, because he realizes that once he realizes, or once he indicates that the devil is real, or once he admits that the devil is real, then he would have to admit that God is real. And that he's just totally fighting against this the entire time, that he's having this hallucination that the devil is there. He asks the devil too. He asks him, "Is God real?" And the devil says he doesn't know whether God is real or not, but that even if he was, modern science and politics are enough to destroy God, and that there will be no need for God, or the Christian God that he knows. And the devil says that the new man is allowed to become a man God. In this world, everything is permitted. And this is going back to that mantra that Ivan had toward the beginning of the novel, that everything is lawful, and that man will create their own God. They will be their own God. They will create their own philosophies. They will create their own moral code. And this sort of reiterates that philosophy that Ivan held throughout the novel, that everything is lawful. And this is that same philosophy that led to his father's death, which he feels immense guilt for. Okay, the next theme that we see in the novel is Father Zosima's philosophy. So we have Ivan's philosophy, and we have Father Zosima's philosophy, the philosophy that Alyosha carries on throughout the novel, and Alyosha is our hero, remember. And Father Zosima says, "In truth, we are responsible to all for all. It's only that men don't know this. If they knew it, the world would be a paradise at once." Okay, so this is an interesting notion, right? For me, this is the main theme of the novel, that everyone is responsible for everyone else. And this is what Elder Zosima tells Alyosha. And as an aside, Elder Zosima tells Alyosha at the beginning of the novel to leave the monastery. And at first, Alyosha has great trouble with this. He doesn't want to leave. He finds safety and peace in the monastery. But Father Zosima is so wise. And this harkens back to, since we're talking intertextuality and these characters representing Christ and the devil and all of these things, we can also remember Abraham at the beginning of the Old Testament. God commands Abraham to leave his place of comfort and of safety and of peace, and to go out into the world, to sort of have this journey and this adventure. And so Father Zosima is doing the same with Alyosha, right? He is asking Alyosha to go out into the world and to love people up close, even braving the the dangers that are out there, the temptations that are out there, to help them, to serve them. And this is entirely against Ivan's ideology of loving people from a distance. Dostoyevsky purports in this novel that everyone is responsible for everyone else, and it permeates the entire novel, that we are responsible for our actions and everyone else's actions, whether good or bad. And that notion is terrifying, right? It's a heavy, heavy burden. And it's just one of those notions in the novel, this idea that we are responsible for our actions and everybody else's actions that we'll ever meet or will not ever meet, is such a heavy idea. And this is the idea that just kept me thinking for days on end. And what does he mean? And how can we do this? And it goes back to the onion, honestly, that every single interaction that we have with other people can either be a hell for them or a paradise for them. And to take that memory and forward it. And it's really incalculable how much good we can do. One small act of kindness can change the world. This notion is more than a notion, more than an ideal or sentimentalism. It is a tangible truth, and it is opposite of Ivan's ideologies. And we must love one another and forgive one another. There should be no disparity between the kindness and love we show our enemies and the love and kindness we bestow upon our friends. Kindness and love is the essence of a celestial life. It's the essence of Christ and therefore the essence of God himself. At the end of the novel, Alyosha speaks to the boys and tells them to remember how they feel at this moment at the funeral of Ilyusha, and to remember the love that they had for him, and to remember the love that they have for each other in that moment, and to take that memory with them. And that whenever they are out in the world and they come across a situation where they are about to make a choice, they're there to make the right choice, to remember to make the right choice, the choice that allows them to love someone in an instant, to forgive someone in an instant. He says to them, "Dear friends, do not be afraid of life, for how good is life when one does some good and upright thing? As we lift one another, comfort one another, feed and clothe one another, we choose God. So, my friends, let us love one another and lift one another and choose to do good in this world." This is the essence, the core of this novel, this another notion of Christ-like love, which is very similar to what we saw in War and Peace. This idea of loving and giving an onion to people, of making sure our interactions with everyone are leaving them better. Thank you so much for spending time with me reading The Brothers Karamazov. It was so far my favorite novel of the list, but it's only the second novel of the entire book club series. So the next one on the list is Orlando by Virginia Woolf, which we'll be reading for the month of March. Even though March is almost over, you guys can still get a copy of it. It's a very short read compared to War and Peace and The Brothers Karamazov.